Hello and welcome back to the Acceleration Netcast. In today's episode, we've got some tabular data over here, and in this tabular data, each row has an amount associated with it, and that amount is associated with both a type, either class 1 or class 2, and a state, Washington, Oregon, or California. And what we want over here is we want a summary table. What makes a summary table interesting is, unlike a lot of summary tables that want to find the total for class 1 in California or the average for class 1 in California, this one wants to find the minimum. So if we do this in vanilla Excel, we can double click, we can get the formula, and it's a fairly, I don't know if I'd call it an easy array formula, but it's fairly simple, fairly straightforward. It uses this guy here to do the filtering, and then it does the minimum on that resultant array, and that works just fine. Control-Shift-Enter. You have to use Control-Shift-Enter because it's an array formula. Left click and drag it down. That works okay, but one of the issues we run into is that if you have a calculation where there are no rows for Oregon or class 2, this should return a null, but it does return a 0 instead, which is inaccurate. The minimum amount is not 0, the minimum amount is nothing. There is no minimum amount. Also, if we add rows over here to this table for a state other than, say, California or Oregon or Washington, or a type different than class 1 or class 2, this table over here is going to ignore it. Assuming that I even built the references correctly, it's going to ignore it. So we want something a bit more dynamic, and we're going to use Power Pivot and a little bit of DAX to handle that problem. So let's head over here. One last thing I do want to say before we go ahead. The behavior we want from this summary table is we do want to make sure that if there is some combination that has no rows here in the initial data table, like Oregon class 2, we do want a row in the summary table. We just want it to be blank. Okay, so let's keep going, because otherwise there's a different solution you can use. So let's head over here. So here we've got that same exact data, but now it's in a table object. So if I go up here to Table Tools Design, it's called Tab Data. And what I want to do is I'm going to load this up to the data model, and then over here I'm going to use an existing connection to query it back down into this sheet from the data model, and then I'll be able to change that query to sort of add some DAX to get the behavior that we want. We're going to run into a problem though, because this is a linked table to the data model, so it's not going to let us do this initially, but I have a workaround. So first things first, let's go to Power Pivot. Let's make sure we've got a cell in here selected, and we're going to go Add to Data Model. I'm going to resize this so you can see the thing. I'm going to right-click down here. I'm going to rename that, and I'm going to call this Fact Data, and hit Enter. Okay, so now the data model, our little internal database, has a table called Fact Data. I'm going to go ahead and minimize that. So what I'd like to do at this point is head up to Data and go to Existing Connections and go to Tables and reference that new Fact Data table, but it's not listed here, right? So the model is listed, but if I click OK, or Open, I get everything but I want, which is a table. I can do a report on the entire model, but not on individual tables. So the workaround for that is we're just going to create a dummy table in the data model, and we'll reference that, and then we'll be able to edit that code. So let's select this here. So rather than adding it to the data model, which I don't think you could even do this way, I guess you can, we're going to do a copy-paste. That way it's not linked, it's just a moving data straight to the data model. So like Control-C to copy it, head over to the data model, and I'm going to go to Home. Let's see, hold on. Home and paste. And I'm just going to call this XOG for exogenous because it doesn't do anything. It's got nothing to do with the actual data model. And I'm going to call it some data. Or, yeah, whatever, doesn't matter. Click OK. Great, so now I've got that in there. I minimize this. Now, if I click over here and go over to Data and Existing Connections and go over to Tables, that exogenous sum data it does exist as a connection that we can reference. So when I click Open on this guy, I can load it not just as a pivot chart or a pivot report, but as an actual table itself. So I'm going to query and get just that table. So this is a table which queries the data model and pulls the exogenous table that we made just a second ago. So if I right-click here and go to Table, so maybe this will be easier to see. I go to Edit DAX. I can now change the command type from Table to DAX, and I can add an Evaluate, because we're going to evaluate a table. We're going to bring it back, and well, what do I want to evaluate? Well, let's do Fact Data. Click OK. So now I've added this table to the data model, and I've got this table over here which queries it in the data model. So now I can right-click Let's add some more interesting DAX to actually make it useful, get that behavior that we want. See, I don't know if you can see that. Click up here, table, edit DAX. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is rather than just referencing the table directly, we're going to do a reference to, we're going to make a values call. Values call. So we're going to call the values function. What values does is it takes all the distinct values of a certain column. So we can't give it the whole table. We need to give it a column. So let's give it the type column. So this should produce a new table with one column that's got all the distinct values in type. Click OK, and there we go. So we've got type 1 and 2. So in this table over here, there's only type 1 and 2. So if I right-click again, go to Edit DAX, just to make sure you've got the idea, I'm going to change this from type to state. I click OK, and now I've got all the distinct states. Okay, that's not super interesting, but if you haven't seen it before, that's how that works. Click up here, go to Table, Edit DAX. So now let's do something a bit more interesting. We're going to do a cross-join, which is going to create a new table with all the different possible combinations of two other tables that we give it. So we're going to give it the values state and the values type, and it's going to create a new table with two columns and all the combinations of those two columns. So if that didn't make sense, watch. It'll be pretty obvious once I do it. So let's head down here. We're going to do a cross join. And, got to spell things right, otherwise they don't work. 1, 2, 3, 4. So now I'm going to, let's see, Shift, Control C, add myself a comma. The second argument, you can't do state twice. What you want to do is you want to add type. And I hit Enter. Close out the cross join, and now when I click OK, I get the combination, all the different possible combinations of those two things. Okay, so we're most of the way there in terms of the DAX part, at least. Table, edit DAX. So now what we want to do, this is slightly more slightly harder to look at, but still pretty easy, is we need to add columns to this table. Well, if we want to add columns, thankfully in DAX you get to do something as easy as add columns. Okay, so now let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So add columns takes the first argument is always going to be, well, what table do you want to add columns to? Well, we want to add columns to this table right here, which corresponds to this part of the query right now. All right, well, what do you want to add? So what's the name of the new column that you want to create? Well, we're just going to call this min AMT. Okay. So now that you've got that, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. The question is what is the calculation? Well, we're going to start with the sort of what you might see in a textbook is called the naive approach, something that makes sense when you do it the first time but isn't actually going to work. So we're going to do a sum. And what are we going to do the sum of? Well, we're going to do the sum of fact, data, AMT. Now, the good news, or bad news, depending on your perspective, is that this is going to produce a number. It's just going to produce the wrong number. So I'm going to close that out. So when I click OK, what I'm going to get is, I'm going to get a number, but, boy, that doesn't make sense. Hold on. I think I used the wrong edit DAX. Oh, not sum. We want the minimum amount. So we get a number. The problem is that this minimum amount is not for Washington Class 2. It's not some sort of coincidence that they all have the same minimum amount. It's not taking into account Washington or Class 2, so it's getting the minimum for the entire column. So this row currently has a row context, but we need to promote that row context to a filter context so that this calculation here takes into account to only look at Class 2 and Washington. Let's see, if you know your DAX, you know where I'm going. We're going to use a calculate function. We're going to wrap the whole thing in a calculate. And calculate does several things, but that's one of its most meaningful jobs. Calculate is to promote a row context to a filter context. So now, when I click OK, suddenly I get the behavior that I want. I've got the minimum for each combination here, and here for Oregon Class 2, where there is no equivalent row here in the data, I've got a blank, which is exactly what I want. Okay, so I'm going to head over into table. So that's most of the hard work. One final thing, usually when you see for add columns, in most languages you sort of keep things lined up like this, so arguments 2 and 3 have their own lines. Oftentimes here what you'll see is you'll see these added just to a single line, because if you do several of these, it just sort of keeps them nice and lined up. All right, so there's that. Also, I'm going to just to make things a little bit nicer, I'm going to do an order by. So we're going to do fact data state, ASC for ascending, and fact data type, also ASC for ascending. So this is just going to change the way in which this is ordered, just to make sure that we are correctly ordering it by state and then by type. See if I made a typo. Nope, no I didn't. Okay. So what's nice about this is that it's dynamic. So if I come down here and I do something kind of simple, like let's just do Oregon class 1, and let's do 25. I click over here. It's not going to update quite that automatically because it's technically an external connection, but if you head over here to data and click on refresh all, it's going to change the value to 25. Also, a bit more interestingly, if I hit tab, I add Idaho and add class 1 and also, I don't know, 64, doesn't really matter. Now when I come up here and refresh it again, it's actually, not only is it going to update these calculations, it's going to change the number of different sort of permutations, the number of rows in this summary table. Click OK. So now it's taking Idaho into account. And likewise, if I tab, ID, class 2, and, I'm sorry, let's do class 3, and do 44. If I head up here and refresh again, I get an even bigger table to take into account all the different possible combinations. And as one, I think this is the very last thought, if I need to change sort of the order, sometimes DAX will give these to you in an order that you don't like. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to make that explicit in the actual DAX query, and I couldn't really find a good solution, but what works awfully darn well is, let's say I want, for whatever reason, the minimum amount to be here in the front. Just click on the entire column, head over here to the edge till you get this sort of compass-looking pointer. Left-click, drag, and add shift. So this is going to be a cut insert operation, and let go. And now when I refresh all, it has this new order that I like. Let's see, I'm also going to, just because I like, making sure Control-Shift-4 for currency. Ooh, that's a little big. Okay, there we go. Okay, well, I do hope that was helpful, and I will see you next video.